Section 28 of Hand and Ring by Anna Katharine Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 3, The Scales of Justice. Chapter 27, The Great Trial. Othello. What dost thou think? Iago. Think, my lord? Othello. By heaven, he echoes me, as if there were some monster in his thought too hideous to be shown. Othello. Sibley was in a stir. Sibley was the central point of interest for the whole country. The great trial was in progress, and the curiosity of the populace knew no bounds. In a room of the hotel sat our two detectives. They had just come from the courthouse. Both seemed inclined to talk, though both showed an indisposition to open the conversation. A hesitation lay between them, a certain thin veil of embarrassment that either one would have found it hard to explain, and yet which sufficed to make their intercourse a trifle uncertain in its character, though Hickory's look had lost none of its rude good humor, and Byrd's manner was the same mixture of easy nonchalance and quiet self-possession it had always been. It was Hickory who spoke at last. "Well, Byrd," was his suggestive exclamation. "Well, Hickory," was the quiet reply. "What do you think of the case so far?" "I think," the words came somewhat slowly, "I think that it looks bad. Bad for the prisoner, I mean," he explained the next moment with a quick flush. "Your sympathies are evidently with Mansell," Hickory quietly remarked. "Yes," was the slow reply. "Not that I think him innocent, or would turn a hair's breadth from the truth to serve him." "He is a manly fellow," Hickory bluntly admitted, after a moment's puff at the pipe he was smoking. "Do you remember the peculiar straightforwardness of his look when he uttered his plea of not guilty, and the tone he used, too, so quiet, yet so emphatic, you could have heard a pin drop?" "Yes," returned Mr. Byrd, with a quick contraction of his usually smooth brow. "Have you noticed," the other broke forth after another puff, "a certain curious air of disdain that he wears?" "Yes," was again the short reply. "I wonder what it means?" queried Hickory carelessly, knocking the ashes out of his pipe. Mr. Byrd flashed a quick askance look at his colleague from under his half-fallen lids, but made no answer. "It is not pride alone," resumed the rough and ready detective, half musingly, "though he's as proud as the best of 'em. Neither is it any sort of make-believe, or I wouldn't be caught by it. 'Tis what?" And Hickory rubbed his nose with his thoughtful forefinger, and looked inquiringly at Mr. Byrd. "How should I know?" remarked the other, tossing his stump of a cigar into the fire. "Mr. Mansell is too deep a problem for me." "And Miss Dare, too?" "And Miss Dare." Silence followed this admission, which Hickory broke at last by observing: "The day that he sees her on the witness stand will be interesting, eh?" "It is not far off," declared Mr. Byrd. "No?" "I think she will be called as a witness to morrow." "Have you noticed," began Hickory again, after another short interval of quiet contemplation, "that it is only when Miss Dare is present that Mansell wears the look of scorn I have just mentioned?" "Hickory," said Mr. Byrd, wheeling directly about in his chair, and for the first time surveying his colleague squarely, "I have noticed this, that ever since the day she made her first appearance in the court room she has sat with her eyes fixed earnestly upon the prisoner, and that he has never answered her look by so much as a glance in her direction. This has but one explanation, as I take it. He never forgets that it is through her he has been brought to trial for his life." Mr. Byrd uttered this very distinctly, and with a decided emphasis. But the impervious Hickory only settled himself farther back in his chair, and stretching his feet out toward the fire, remarked dryly: Perhaps I am not much of a judge of human nature, but I should have said now that this Mansell was not a man to treat her contemptuously for that. Rage he might show, or hatred, but this quiet ignoring of her presence seems a little too dignified for a criminal facing a person he has every reason to believe is convinced of his guilt. Ordinary rules don't apply to this man. Neither you nor I can sound his nature. If he displays contempt, it is because he is of the sort to feel it for the woman who has betrayed him." "You make him out mean spirited, then, as well as wicked?" "I make him out human. More than that," Mr. Byrd resumed, after a moment's thought. "I make him out consistent. A man who lets his passions sway him to the extent of committing a murder for the purpose of satisfying his love or his ambition is not of the unselfish caste that would appreciate such a sacrifice as Miss Dare has made. This under the supposition that our reasons for believing him guilty are well founded. If our suppositions are false, and the crime was not committed by him, his contempt needs no explanation." "Just so." The peculiar tone in which this was uttered caused Mr. Byrd to flash another quick look at his colleague. Hickory did not seem to observe it. "What makes you think Miss Dare will be called to the witness stand to morrow?" he asked. "Well, I will tell you," returned Byrd, with the sudden vivacity of one glad to turn the current of conversation into a fresh channel. "If you have followed the method of the prosecution as I have done, you will have noticed that it has advanced to its point by definite stages. First, witnesses were produced to prove the existence of motive on the part of the accused. Mr. Goodman was called to the witness stand, and after him other business men of Buffalo, all of whom united in unqualified assertions of the prisoner's frequently expressed desire for a sum of money sufficient to put his invention into practical use. Next, the amount considered necessary for this purpose was ascertained, and found to be just covered by the legacy bequeathed him by his aunt, after which ample evidence was produced to show that he knew the extent of her small fortune, and the fact that she had by her will made him her heir. Motive for the crime being thus established, they now proceeded to prove that he was not without actual opportunity for perpetrating it. He was shown to have been in Sibley at the time of the murder. The station master at Monteith was confronted with the prisoner, also old Sally Perkins. Then you and I came before the court with our testimony, and whatever doubt may have remained as to his having been in a position to effect his aunt's death, and afterward escaped unnoticed by means of the path leading over the hills to Monteith Quarry Station, was swept away. What remains? To connect him with the murder itself by some strong link of circumstantial evidence, such as the ring provides. And who is it that can give testimony regarding the ring? Miss Dare. Well, she will do it," was the dry remark of Hickory. "She will be obliged to do it," was the emphatic response of Byrd. Again their glances crossed in a furtive way both seemed ready to ignore. "What do you think of Orcutt?" Hickory next inquired. "He is very quiet." "Too quiet, eh?" "Perhaps. Folks that know him well declare they have never before saw him conduct a case in so temperate a manner. He has scarcely made an effort at cross examination, and in fact has thus far won nothing for the defence except that astonishing tribute to the prisoner's character given by Mr. Goodman." "Mr. Goodman is Mansell's friend." "I know it, but his short, decisive statements told upon the jury. Such a man as he made Mansell out to be is just the sort to create an impression on a body of men like them." "Orcutt understands a jury." "Orcutt understands his case. He knows he can make nothing by attempting to shake the evidence which has been presented by the prosecution. The facts are too clear, and the witnesses which have been called to testify are too reliable a character. Whatever defence he contemplates, it will not rest upon a denial of any of the facts brought to light through our efforts, or the evidence of such persons as Messrs. Goodman and Harrison. No. The question is, then, in what will it lie? Some strong point, I warrant you, or he would not hold himself and his plans so completely in reserve. But what strong point? I acknowledge the uncertainty troubles me. I don't wonder, rejoined Hickory. So it does me. And a constraint again fell between them that lasted till Hickory put his pipe in his pocket and signified his intention of returning to his own apartments. End of chapter 27. Of Hand and Ring by Anna Katharine Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 28. The Chief Witness for the Prosecution. Part 1. Oh, why you live, tell truth, and shame the devil. Henry IV. Mr. Byrd's countenance after the departure of his companion was anything but cheerful. The fact is, he was secretly uneasy. He dreaded the morrow. He dreaded the testimony of Miss Dare. He had not yet escaped so fully from under the dominion of her fascination as to regard with equanimity this unhappy woman forcing herself to give testimony compromising to the man she loved. Yet when the morrow came, he was among the first to secure a seat in the courtroom. Though the scene was likely to be harrowing to his feelings, he had no wish to lose it, and indeed chose such a position as would give him the best opportunity for observing the prisoner and surveying the witnesses. He was not the only one on the lookout for the testimony of Miss Dare. The increased number of the spectators and the general air of expectation visible in more than one of the chief actors in this terrible drama gave suspicious proof of the fact, even if the deadly pallor of the lady herself had not revealed her own feelings in regard to the subject. The entrance of the prisoner was more marked, too, than usual. His air and manner were emphasized, so to speak, and his face, when he turned it toward the jury, wore an iron look of resolution that would have made him conspicuous had he occupied a less prominent position than that of the dock. Miss Dare, who had flashed her eyes toward him at the moment of his first appearance, dropped them again, contrary to her usual custom. Was it because she knew the moment was at hand when their glances would be obliged to meet? Mr. Orcutt, whom no movement on the part of Miss Dare ever escaped, leaned over and spoke to the prisoner. "Mr. Mansell," said he, "are you prepared to submit with composure to the ordeal of confronting Miss Dare?" "Yes," was the stern reply. "I would then advise you to look at her now," proceeded his counsel. "She is not turned this way, and you can observe her without encountering her glance. A quick look at this moment may save you from betraying any undue emotion when you see her upon the stand." The accused smiled with a bitterness Mr. Orcutt thought perfectly natural, and slowly prepared to obey. As he raised his eyes and allowed them to traverse the room until they settled upon the countenance of the woman he loved, this other man who, out of a still more absorbing passion for Imogene, was at that very moment doing all that lay in his power for the saving of this his openly acknowledged rival, watched him with the closest and most breathless attention. It was another instance of that peculiar fascination which a successful rival has for an unsuccessful one. It was as if this great lawyer's thoughts reverted to his love, and he asked himself, "What is there in this Mansell that she should prefer him to me. And Orcutt himself, though happily unaware of the fact, was at that same instant under a scrutiny as narrow as that he bestowed upon his client. Mr. Ferris, who knew his secret, felt a keen interest in watching how he would conduct himself at this juncture. Not an expression of the lawyer's keen and puzzling eye but was seen by the District Attorney and noted, even if it was not understood. Of the three, Mr. Ferris was the first to turn away, and his thoughts, if they could have been put into words, might have run something like this: "That man," meaning Orcutt, "is doing the noblest work one human being can perform for another, and yet there is something in his face I do not comprehend. Can it be he hopes to win Miss Dare by his effort to save his rival?" As for the thoughts of the person thus unconsciously subjected to the criticism of his dearest friend, let our knowledge of the springs that govern his action serve to interpret both the depth and bitterness of his curiosity, while the sentiments of Mansell. But who can read what lurks behind the irony of that sternly composed countenance? Not Imogene, not Orcutt, not Ferris. His secret, if he owns one, he keeps well, and his lids scarcely quiver as he drops them over the eyes that but a moment before reflected the grand beauty of the unfortunate woman for whom he so lately protested the most fervent love. The next moment the court was opened, and Miss Dare's name was called by the District Attorney. With a last look at the unresponsive prisoner, Imogene rose, took her place on the witness stand, and faced the jury. It was a memorable moment. If the curious and impressible crowd of spectators about her had been ignorant of her true relations to the accused, the deadly stillness and immobility of her bearing would have convinced them that emotion of the deepest nature lay behind the still, white mask she had thought fit to assume. That she was beautiful and confronted them from that common stand as from a throne did not serve to lessen the impression she made. The officer held the Bible toward her. With a look that Mr. Byrd was fain to consider one of natural shrinking only, she laid her white hand upon it, but at the intimation from the officer, "The right hand, if you please, miss," she started and made the exchange he suggested, while at the same moment there rang upon her ear the voice of the clerk as he administered the awful adjuration that she should, as she believed and hoped in eternal mercy, tell the truth as between this man and the law, and keep not one tittle back. The book was then lifted to her lips by the officer and withdrawn. "Take your seat, Miss Dare," said the District Attorney, and the examination began. "Your name, if you please." "Imogene Dare." "Are you married or single?" "I am single." "Where were you born?" Now this was a painful question to one of her history. Indeed, she showed it to be so by the flush which rose to her cheek and by the decided trembling of her proud lip. But she did not seek to evade it. "Sir," she said, "I cannot answer you. I never heard any of the particulars of my birth. I was a foundling." The mingled gentleness and dignity with which she made this acknowledgment won for her the instantaneous sympathy of all present. Mr. Orcutt saw this, and the flash of indignation that had involuntarily passed between him and the prisoner subsided as quickly as it arose. Mr. Ferris went on. "Where do you live?" "In this town." "With whom do you live?" "I am boarding at the present with a woman of the name of Kennedy. I support myself by my needle," she hurriedly added, as though anxious to forestall his next question. Seeing the prisoner start at this, Imogene lifted her head still higher. Evidently this former lover of hers knew little of her movements since they parted so many weeks ago. "And how long is it since you supported yourself in this way?" asked the District Attorney. "For a few weeks only. Formerly," she said, and making a slight inclination in the direction of the prisoner's counsel, "I lived in the household of Mr. Orcutt, where I occupied the position of assistant to the lady who looks after his domestic affairs," and her eye met the lawyer's with a look of pride that made him inwardly cringe, though not even the jealous glance of the prisoner could detect that an eyelash quivered or a flicker disturbed the studied serenity of his gaze. The District Attorney opened his lips as if to pursue this topic, but meeting his opponent's eye, concluded to waive further preliminaries and proceed at once to the more serious part of the examination. "Miss Dare," said he, "will you look at the prisoner and tell us if you have any acquaintance with him?" Slowly she prepared to reply. Slowly she turned her head and let her glance traverse the vast crowd till it settled upon her former lover. The look which passed like lightning across her face as she encountered his gaze fixed for the first time steadily upon her own, no one in that assemblage ever forgot. "Yes," she returned quietly, but in a tone that made Mansell quiver and look away, despite his iron self-command. "I know him." "Will you be kind enough to say how long you have known him, and where it was you first made his acquaintance?" "I met him first in Buffalo, some 4 months since," was the steady reply. "He was calling at a friend's house where I was staying." "Did you at that time know of his relation to your townswoman, Mrs. Clemmens?" "No, sir. It was not till I had seen him several times that I learned he had any connections in Sibley." "Miss Dare, you will excuse me, but it is highly desirable for the court to know if the prisoner ever paid his addresses to you." The deep, almost agonizing blush that colored her white cheeks answered as truly as the slow "yes" that struggled painfully to her lips. "And excuse me again, Miss Dare, did he propose marriage to you?" "He did." "Did you accept him?" "I did not." "Did you refuse him?" "I refused to engage myself to him." "Miss Dare, will you tell us when you left Buffalo?" "On the 19th day of August last." "Did the prisoner accompany you?" "He did not." "Upon what sort of terms did you part?" "Good terms, sir." "Do you mean friendly terms, or such as are held by a man and a woman between whom an attachment exists which, under favorable circumstances, may culminate in marriage?" "The latter, sir, I think." "Did you receive any letters from the prisoner after your return to Sibley?" "Yes, sir." "And did you answer them?" "I did." "Miss Dare, may I now ask what reasons you gave the prisoner for declining his offer? That is, if my friend does not object to the question," added the District Attorney, turning with courtesy toward Mr. Orcutt. The latter, who had started to his feet, bowed composedly and prepared to resume his seat. "I desire to put nothing in the way of your eliciting the whole truth concerning this matter," was his quiet, if somewhat constrained, response. Mr. Ferris at once turned back to Miss Dare. "You will, then, answer," he said. Imogene lifted her head and complied. "I told him," she declared, with thrilling distinctness, "that he was in no condition to marry. I am by nature an ambitious woman, and, not having suffered at that time, thought more of my position before the world than of what constitutes the worth and dignity of a man." No one who heard these words could doubt they were addressed to the prisoner. Haughtily as she held herself, there was a deprecatory humility in her tone that neither judge nor jury could have elicited from her. Naturally, many eyes turned in the direction of the prisoner. They saw two white faces before them, that of the accused and that of his counsel, who sat near him. But the pallor of the one was of scorn, and that of the other, well, No one who knew the relations of Mr. Orcutt to the witness could wonder that the renowned lawyer shrank from hearing the woman he loved confess her partiality for another man. Mr. Ferris, who understood the situation as well as any one, but who had passed the point where sympathy could interfere with his action, showed a disposition to press his advantage. "Miss Dare," he inquired, in declining the proposal of the prisoner, "did you state to him in so many words these objections you have here mentioned?" "I did." "And what answer did he give you?" "He replied that he was also ambitious, and hoped and intended to make a success in life." "And did he tell you how he hoped and intended to make a success?" "He did." "Miss Dare, were these letters written by you?" She looked at the packet he held toward her, started as she saw the broad black ribbon that encircled it, and bowed her head. "I have no doubt these are my letters," she rejoined, a little tremulously, for her, and unbinding the packet she examined its contents. "Yes," she answered, "they are. These letters were all written by me." And she handed them back with such haste that the ribbon which bound them remained in her fingers, where consciously or unconsciously she held it clutched all through the remaining time of her examination. "Now," said the District Attorney, "I propose to read two of these letters. Does my friend wish to look at them before I offer them in evidence?" holding them out to Mr. Orcutt. Every eye in the court room was fixed upon the latter's face as the letters addressed to his rival by the woman he wished to make his wife were tendered in this public manner to his inspection. Even the iron face of Mansell relaxed into an expression of commiseration as he turned and surveyed the man who, in despite of the anomalous position they held toward each other, was thus engaged in battling for his life before the eyes of the whole world. At that instant there was not a spectator who did not feel that Tremont Orcutt was the hero of the moment. He slowly turned to the prisoner. "Have you any objection to these letters being read?" "No," returned the other in a low tone. Mr. Orcutt turned firmly to the District Attorney. "You may read them if you think proper," said he. Mr. Ferris bowed. The letters were marked as exhibits by the stenographic reporter, who was taking the minutes of testimony, and handed back to Ferris, who proceeded to read the following in a clear voice to the jury: "Sibley, New York, September 7th, 1882. "Dear friend, you show signs of impatience, and ask for a word to help you through this period of uncertainty and unrest. What can I say more than I have said? That I believe in you and in your invention, and proudly wait for the hour when you will come to claim me with the fruit of your labors in your hand. I am impatient myself, but I have more trust than you. Some one will see the value of your work before long, or else your aunt will interest herself in your success and lend you that practical assistance which you need to start you in the way of fortune and fame. I cannot think you are going to fail. I will not allow myself to look forward to anything less than success for you and happiness for myself, for the one involves the other, as you must know by this time, or else believe me to be the most heartless of coquettes. Wishing to see you, but of the opinion that further meetings between us would be unwise till our future looks more settled, I remain, hopefully yours, Imogene Dare." "The other letter I propose to read," continued Mr. Ferris, "is dated September 23rd, 3 days before the widow's death. Dear Craik, since you insist on seeing me, and say that you have reasons of your own for not visiting me openly, I will consent to meet you at the trysting spot you mentioned, though all such underhand dealings are as foreign to my nature as I believe them to be to yours. Trusting that fortune will so favor us as to make it unnecessary for us to meet in this way more than once. I wait in anxiety for your coming. Imogene Dare. End of chapter 28, part 1. Of Hand and Ring by Katharine Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 28. The Chief Witness for the Prosecution, Part 2. These letters, unfolding relations that, up to this time, had been barely surmised by the persons congregated before her, created a great impression. To those especially who knew her, and believed her to be engaged to Mr. Orcutt, the surprise was well nigh thrilling. The witness seemed to feel this, and bestowed a short quick glance upon the lawyer that may have partially recompensed him for the unpleasantness of the general curiosity. The prosecuting attorney went on without pause. "Miss Dare," said he, "did you meet the prisoner as you promised?" "I did." "Will you tell me when and where?" "On the afternoon of Monday, September 27th, in the glade back of Mrs. Clemmens' house." "Miss Dare, we fully realize the pain it must cost you to refer to these matters, but I must request you tell us what passed between you at this interview." "If you will ask me questions, sir, I will answer them with the truth the subject demands." The sorrowful dignity with which this was said called forth a bow from the prosecuting attorney. "Very well," he rejoined. "Did the prisoner have anything to say about his prospects?" "He did." "How did he speak of them?" "Despondingly." "And what reason did he give for this?" "He said he had failed to interest any capitalist in his invention." "Any other reason?" "Yes." "What was that?" "That he had just come from his aunt, whom he had tried to persuade to advance him a sum of money to carry out his wishes, but that she had refused." "He told you that?" "Yes, sir." "Did he also tell you what path he had taken to his aunt's house?" "No, sir." "Was there anything said by him to show he did not take the secret path through the woods and across the bog to her back door?" "No, sir." "Or that he did not return in the same way?" "No, sir." "Miss Dare, did the prisoner express to you at this time irritation as well as regret at the result of his efforts to elicit money from his aunt?" "Yes," was the evidently forced reply. "Can you remember any words that he used which would tend to show the condition of his mind?" "I have no memory for words," she began, but flushed as she met the eye of the judge and perhaps remembered her oath. "I do recollect, however, one expression he used. He said, 'My life is worth nothing to me without success. If only to win you I must put this matter through, and I will do it yet.'" She repeated this quietly, giving it no emphasis and scarcely any inflection, as if she hoped by her mechanical way of uttering it to rob it of any special meaning. But she did not succeed, as was shown by the compassionate tone in which Mr. Ferris next addressed her. "Miss Dare, did you express any anger yourself at the refusal of Mrs. Clemmens to assist the prisoner by lending him such moneys as he required?" "Yes, sir, I fear I did. It seemed unreasonable to me then, and I was very anxious he should have that opportunity to make fame and fortune which I thought his genius merited." "Miss Dare," inquired the District Attorney, calling to his aid such words as he had heard from old Sally in reference to this interview, "did you make use of any such expression as this, 'I wish I knew Mrs. Clemmens'?" "I believe I did." "And did this mean that you had no acquaintance with the murdered woman at that time?" pursued Mr. Ferris, half turning to the prisoner's counsel, as if he anticipated the objection which the gentleman might very properly make to a question concerning the intention of a witness. "And Mr. Orcutt yielding to a professional instinct, did indeed make a slight movement as if to rise, but became instantly motionless. Nothing could be more painful to him than to wrangle before the crowded courtroom over these dealings between the woman he loved and the man he was now defending. Mr. Ferris turned back to the witness and awaited her answer. It came without hesitation. "I meant that, sir." "And what did the prisoner say when you gave utterance to this wish?" "He asked me why I desired to know her." "And what did you reply?" "That if I knew her, I might be able to persuade her to listen to his request." "And what answer had he for this?" "None but a quick shake of his head." "Miss Dare, up to the time of this interview, had you ever received any gift from the prisoner, jewelry, for instance, say a ring?" "No, sir." "Did he offer you such a gift, then?" "He did." "What was it?" "A gold ring set with a diamond." "Did you receive it?" "No, sir. I felt that in taking a ring from him I would be giving an irrevocable promise, and I was not ready to do that." "Did you allow him to put it on your finger?" "I did." "And it remained there?" suggested Mr. Ferris, with a smile. "A minute, maybe." "Which of you, then, took it off?" "I did." "And what did you say when you took it off?" "I do not remember my words." And again recalling old Sally's account of this interview, Mr. Ferris asked, "Were they these? I cannot wait till tomorrow." "Yes, I believe they were." "And when he inquired why tomorrow, did you reply, 'A night has been known to change the whole current of one's affairs'?" "I did." "Miss Dare, what did you mean by those words?" "I object," cried Mr. Orcutt, rising. Unseen by any save himself, the prisoner had made him an eloquent gesture, slight but peremptory. "I think it is one I have a right to ask," urged the District Attorney. But Mr. Orcutt, who manifestly had the best argument, maintained his objection, and the court instantly ruled in his favor. Mr. Ferris prepared to modify his question, but before he could speak the voice of Miss Dare was heard. "Gentlemen," said she, "there was no need of all this talk. I intended to seek an interview with Mrs. Clemmens and try what the effect would be of confiding to her my interest in her nephew." The dignified simplicity with which she spoke, and the air of quiet candor that for that one moment surrounded her, gave to this voluntary explanation an unexpected force that carried it quite home to the hearts of the jury. Even Mr. Orcutt could not preserve the frown with which he had confronted her at the first movement of her lips, but turned toward the prisoner with a look almost congratulatory in its character. But Mr. Byrd, who for reasons of his own kept his eyes upon that prisoner, observed that it was met with no other return than the shadow of a bitter smile which now and then visited his otherwise unmoved countenance. Mr. Ferris, who, in his friendship for the witness, was secretly rejoiced in an explanation which separated her from the crime of her lover, bowed in acknowledgment of the answer she had been pleased to give him in face of the ruling of the court, and calmly proceeded: "And what reply did the prisoner make you when you uttered this remark in reference to the change that a single day sometimes makes in one's affairs?" "Something in the way of assent." "Can you not give us his words?" "No, sir." "Well, then, can you tell us whether or not he looked thoughtful when you said this?" "He may have done so, sir." "Did it strike you at the time that he reflected on what you said?" "I could not say how it struck me at the time." "Did he look at you a few minutes before speaking, or in any way conduct himself as if he had been set thinking?" "He did not speak for a few minutes." "And looked at you?" "Yes, sir." The District Attorney paused a moment as if to let the results of his examination sink into the minds of the jury. Then he went on: "Miss Dare, You say you returned the ring to the prisoner?" "Yes, sir." "You say positively that the ring passed from you to him, that you saw it in his hand after it had left yours?" "No, sir. The ring passed from me to him, but I did not see it in his hand, because I did not return it to him that way. I dropped it into his pocket." At this acknowledgment, which made both the prisoner and his counsel look up, Mr. Byrd felt himself nudged by Hickory. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Yes," returned the other. "And do you believe it?" "Miss Dare is on oath," was the reply. "Pooh!" was Hickory's whispered exclamation. The District Attorney alone showed no surprise. "You dropped it into his pocket," he resumed. "How came you to do that?" "I was weary of the strife which had followed my refusal to accept this token. He would not take it from me himself, so I restored it to him in the way I have said." "Miss Dare, will you tell us what pocket this was?" "The outside pocket on the left side of his coat," she returned, with a cold and careful exactness that caused the prisoner to drop his eyes from her face with that faint but scornful twitch of the muscles about his mouth, which gave to his countenance now and then the proud look of disdain which both detectives had noted. "Miss Dare," continued the prosecuting attorney, "did you see this ring again during the interview?" "No, sir." "Did you detect the prisoner making any move to take it out of his pocket, or have you any reason to believe that it was taken out of the pocket on the left hand side of his coat while you were with him?" "No, sir." "So that, as far as you know, it was still in his pocket when you parted?" "Yes, sir." "Miss Dare, have you ever seen that ring since?" "I have." "When and where?" "I saw it on the morning of the murder. It was lying on the floor of Mrs. Clemmens' dining room. I had gone to the house, in my surprise at hearing of the murderous assault which had been made upon her, and while surveying the spot where she was struck, perceived this ring lying on the floor before me." "What made you think it was the ring which you had returned to the prisoner the day before?" "Because of its setting and the character of the gem, I suppose." "Could you see all this where it was lying on the floor?" "It was brought nearer to my eyes, sir. A gentleman who was standing near picked it up and offered it to me, supposing it was mine. As he held it out in his open palm, I saw it plainly." "Miss Dare, will you tell us what you did when you first saw this ring lying on the floor?" "I covered it with my foot." "Was that before you recognized it?" "I cannot say. I placed my foot upon it instinctively." "How long did you keep it there?" "Some few minutes." "What caused you to move at last?" "I was surprised." "What surprised you?" "A man came to the door." "What man?" "I don't know. A stranger to me. Some one who had been sent on an errand connected with this affair." "What did he say or do to surprise you?" "Nothing. It was what you said after the man had gone." "And what did I say, Miss Dare?" She cast him a look of the faintest appeal, but answered quietly, "Something about its not being the tramp who had committed this crime." "That surprised you?" "That made me start." "Miss Dare, were you present in the house when the dying woman spoke the one or two exclamations which have been testified to in this trial?" "Yes, sir." "What was the burden of the first speech you heard?" "The words 'hand, sir,' and 'ring.' She repeated the two half a dozen times." "Miss Dare, what did you say to the gentleman who showed you the ring and asked if it were yours?" "I told him it was mine, and took it and placed it on my finger." "But the ring was not yours." "My acceptance of it made it mine. In all but that regard it had been mine ever since Mr. Mansell offered it to me the day before." Mr. Ferris surveyed the witness for a moment before saying, "Then you consider it damaging to your lover to have found this ring in that apartment?" Mr. Orcutt instantly rose to object. "I won't press the question," said the District Attorney, with a wave of his hand, and a slight look at the jury. "You ought never to have asked it," exclaimed Mr. Orcutt, with the first appearance of heat he had shown. "You are right," Mr. Ferris coolly responded. "The jury could see the point without any assistance from you or me." "And the jury," returned Mr. Orcutt, with equal coolness, "is scarcely obliged to you for the suggestion." "Well, we won't quarrel about it," declared Mr. Ferris. "We won't quarrel about anything," retorted Mr. Orcutt. "We will try the case in a legal manner." "Have you got through?" inquired Mr. Ferris, nettled. Mr. Orcutt took his seat, with the simple reply, "Go on with the case." The District Attorney, after a momentary pause, to regain the thread of his examination and recover his equanimity, turned to the witness. "Miss Dare," he asked, "how long did you keep that ring on your finger after you left the house?" "A little while, 5 or 10 minutes, perhaps." "Where were you when you took it off?" Her voice sank just a trifle. "On the bridge at Warren Street." "What did you do with it then?" Her eyes, which had been upon the attorney's face, fell slowly. "I dropped it into the water," she said. And the character of her thoughts and suspicions at that time stood revealed. The prosecuting attorney allowed himself a few more questions. "When you parted with the prisoner in the woods, was it with any arrangement for a meeting again before he returned to Buffalo?" "No, sir." "Give us the final words of your conversation, if you please." "We were just parting, and I had turned to go, when he said, 'Is it good bye, then, Imogene?' And I answered, 'That to-morrow must decide.' 'Shall I stay, then?' he inquired, to which I replied, 'Yes.' 'Twas a short, seeming literal repetition of possibly innocent words, but the whisper into which her voice sank at the final "yes" endowed it with a thrilling effect for which even she was not prepared, for she shuddered as she realized the deathly quiet that followed its utterance, and cast a quick look at Mr. Orcutt that was full of question, if not doubt. "I was calculating upon the interview I intended to have with Mrs. Clemmens," she explained, turning toward the Judge with indescribable dignity. "We understand that," remarked the prosecuting attorney kindly, and then inquired, "Was this the last you saw the prisoner until to day?" "No, sir." "When did you see him again?" "On the following Wednesday." "Where?" "In the depot at Syracuse." "How came you to be in Syracuse the day after the murder?" "I had started to go to Buffalo." "What purpose had you in going to Buffalo?" "I wished to see Mr. Mansell." "Did he know you were coming?" "No, sir." "Had no communication passed between you from the time you parted in the woods till you came upon each other in the depot you have just mentioned?" "No, sir." "He had no reason to expect to meet you there?" "No, sir." "With what words did you accost each other?" "I don't know. I have no remembrance of saying anything. I was utterly dumbfounded at seeing him in this place, and cannot say into what exclamation I may have been betrayed." "And he? Don't you remember what he said?" "No, sir. I only know that he started back with a look of great surprise. Afterward he asked if I were on my way to see him." "And what did you answer?" "I don't think I made any answer. I was wondering if he was on his way to see me." "Did you put the question to him?" "Perhaps. I cannot tell. It is all like a dream to me." If she had said a horrible dream, every one there would have believed her. "You can tell us, however, if you held any conversation." "We did not." "And can you tell us how this interview terminated?" "Yes, sir. I turned away and took the train back home, which I saw standing on the track without." "And he?" "Turned away also. Where he went I cannot say." "Miss Dare," the District Attorney's voice was very earnest, "can you tell us which of you made the first movement to go?" "What does he mean by that?" whispered Hickory to Byrd. "I think," she commenced, and paused. Her eyes, in wandering over the throng of spectators before her, had settled on these two detectives, and noting the breathless way in which they looked at her, she seemed to realize that more might lie in this question than at first appeared. "I do not know," she answered at last. "It was a simultaneous movement, I think." "Are you sure?" persisted Mr. Ferris. "You're on oath, Miss Dare. Is there no way in which you can make certain whether you or he took the initiatory step in this sudden parting after an event that so materially changed your mutual prospects?" "No, sir. I can only say that in recalling the sensation of that hour, I am certain of my own movement was not the result of any I saw him take. The instinct to leave the place had its birth in my own breast." "I told you so," commented Hickory in the ear of Byrd. "She is not going to give herself away, whatever happens." "But can you positively say he did not make the first motion to leave?" "No, sir." Mr. Ferris bowed, turned toward the opposing counsel, and said, "The witness is yours." Mr. Ferris sat down perfectly satisfied. He had dexterously brought out Imogene's suspicions of the prisoner's guilt, and knew that the jury must be influenced in their convictions by those of the woman who, of all the world, ought to have believed, if she could, in the innocence of her lover. He did not even fear the cross-examination which he expected to follow. No amount of skill on the part of Orcutt could extract other than the truth, and the truth was that Imogene believed the prisoner to be the murderer of his aunt. He therefore surveyed the courtroom with a smile, and awaited the somehow slow proceedings of his opponent with equanimity. But to the surprise of every one, Mr. Orcutt, after a short consultation with the prisoner, rose and said he had no questions to put to the witness, and Miss Dare was allowed to withdraw from the stand, to the great satisfaction of Mr. Ferris, who found himself by this move in a still better position than he had anticipated. "Byrd," whispered Hickory, as Miss Dare returned somewhat tremulously to her former seat among the witnesses, "Byrd, you could knock me over with a feather. I thought the defence would have no difficulty in riddling this woman's testimony, and they have not even made the effort. Can it be that Orcutt has such an attachment for her that he's going to let his rival hang?" "No, Orcutt isn't the man to deliberately lose a case for any woman. He looks at Miss Dare's testimony from a different standpoint than you do. He believes what she says to be true, and you do not." "Then all I've got to say, so much the worse for Mansell," was the whispered response. "He was a fool to trust his case to that man." The judge, the jury, and all the bystanders in court, it must be confessed, shared the opinion of Hickory. Mr. Orcutt was standing on slippery ground. End of chapter 28, part 2. Of Hand and Ring by Anna Katharine Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 29. The Opening of the Defense. Excellent. I smell a device. 12th night. Late that afternoon the prosecution rested. It had made out a case of great strength and seeming impregnability. Favorably as everyone was disposed to regard the prisoner, the evidence against him was such that, to quote a man who is pretty free with his opinions in the lobby of the courtroom, "Orcutt will have to wake up if he is going to clear his man in face of facts like these." The moment, therefore, when this famous lawyer and distinguished advocate rose to open the defence was one of great interest to more than the immediate actors in the scene. It was felt that hitherto he had rather idled with his case, and curiosity was awake to his future course. Indeed, in the minds of many, the counsel for the prisoner was on trial as well as his client. He rose with more of self-possession, quiet and reserved strength than could be hoped for, and his look toward the court and then to the jury tended to gain for him the confidence which up to this moment he seemed to be losing. Never a handsome man, or even an imposing one, he had the advantage of always rising to the occasion, and whether pleading with a jury or arguing with opposing counsel, flashed with that unmistakable glitter of keen and ready intellect which, once observed in a man, marks him off from his less gifted fellows and makes him the cynosure of all eyes, however insignificant his height, features, or ordinary expression. Today he was even cooler, more brilliant, and more confident in his bearing than usual. Feelings, if feelings he possessed, and we who have seen him at his hearth can have no doubt on this subject, had been set aside when he rose to his feet and turned his face upon the expectant crowd before him. To save his client seemed the one predominating impulse of his soul, and as he drew himself up to speak, Mr. Byrd, who was watching him with the utmost eagerness and anticipation, felt that, despite appearances, despite evidence, despite probability itself, this man was going to win his case. "May it please your honor and gentlemen of the jury," he began, and those who looked at him could not but notice how the prisoner at his side lifted his head at this address, till it seemed as if the words issued from his lips instead of from those of his counsel. "I stand before you today, not to argue with my learned opponent in reference to the evidence which he has brought out with so much ingenuity. I have a simpler duty than that to perform. I have to show you how, in spite of this evidence, in face of all this accumulated testimony, showing the prisoner to have been in possession of both motive and opportunities for committing this crime, he is guiltless of it, that a physical impossibility stands in the way of his being the assailant of the widow Clemmens, and that to whomever or whatsoever her death may be due, it neither was nor could have been the result of any blow struck by the prisoner's hand. In other words, we dispute, not the facts which have led the prosecuting attorney of this district, and perhaps others also, to infer guilt on the part of the prisoner. Here Mr. Orcutt cast a significant glance at the bench where the witnesses sat. But the inference itself. Something besides proof of motive and opportunity must be urged against this man in order to convict him of guilt. Nor is it sufficient to show he was on the scene of the murder some time during the fatal morning when Mrs. Clemmens was attacked. You must prove he was there at the time the deadly blow was struck, for it is not with him as with so many against whom circumstantial evidence of guilt is brought. This man, gentlemen, has an answer for those who accuse him of crime, an answer, too, before which all the circumstantial evidence in the world cannot stand. Do you want to know what it is? Give me but a moment's attention, and you shall hear." Expectation, which had been rising through this exordium, now stood at fever point. Byrd and Hickory held their breaths, and even Miss Dare showed feeling through the icy restraint which had hitherto governed her secret anguish and suspense. Mr. Orcutt went on. "First, however, as I have already said, the prisoner desires it to be understood that he has no intention of disputing the various facts which have been presented before you at this trial. He does not deny that he was in great need of money at the time of his aunt's death, that he came to Sibley to entreat her to advance to him certain sums he deemed necessary to the furtherance of his plans, that he came secretly and in the roundabout way you describe. Neither does he refuse to allow that his errand was also one of love, that he sought and obtained a private interview with the woman he wished to make his wife, in the place and at the time testified to, that the scraps of conversation which have been sworn to as having passed between them at this interview are true in so far as they go, and that he did place upon the finger of Miss Dare a diamond ring. Also, he admits that she took this ring off immediately upon receiving it, saying she could not accept it, at least not then, and that she entreated him to take it back, which he declined to do, though he cannot say she did not restore it in the manner she declares, for he remembers nothing of the ring after the moment he put her hand aside as she was offering it back to him. The prisoner also allows that he slept in the hut, and remained in that especial region of the woods until near noon the next day. But, Your Honor and gentlemen of the jury, what the prisoner does not allow and will not admit is that he struck the blow which eventually robbed Mrs. Clemmens of her life, and the proof which I propose to bring forward in support of this assertion is this. Mrs. Clemmens received the blow which led to her death at some time previous to 3 minutes past 12 on Tuesday, September 26th. This the prosecution has already proved. Now what I propose to show is that Mrs. Clemmens, however or whenever assailed, was still living and unhurt up to 10 minutes before 12 on the same day. A witness, whom you must believe, saw her at that time and conversed with her, proving that the blow by which she came to her death must have occurred after that hour, that is, after 10 minutes before noon. But, Your Honor and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution has already shown that the prisoner stepped onto the train at Monteith Quarry Station at 20 minutes past 1 of that same day, and has produced witnesses whose testimony positively proves that the road he took there from Mrs. Clemmens' house was the same he had traversed in his secret approach to it the day before, viz., the path through the woods, the only path, I may here state, that connects these 2 points with anything like directness. But, sirs, what the prosecution has not shown you, and what it now devolves upon me to show, is that this path which the prisoner is allowed to have taken is one which no man could traverse without encountering great difficulties and many hindrances of speed. It is not only a narrow path filled with various encumbrances in the way of brambles and rolling stones, but it is so flanked by an impenetrable undergrowth in some places, and by low swampy ground in others, that no deviation from its course is possible, while to keep within it and follow its many turns and windings till it finally emerges upon the highway that leads to the Quarry Station would require many more minutes than those which elapsed between the time of the murder and the hour the prisoner made his appearance at the Quarry Station. In other words, I propose to introduce before you as witnesses 2 gentlemen from New York, both of whom are experts in all feats of pedestrianism, and who, having been over the road themselves, are in position to testify that the time necessary for a man to pass by means of this path from Mrs. Clemmens' house to the Quarry Station is, by a definite number of minutes, greater than that allowed to the prisoner by the evidence laid before you. If, therefore, you accept the testimony of the prosecution as true, and believe that the prisoner took the train for Buffalo, which he has been said to do, it follows, as a physical impossibility, for him to have been at Mrs. Clemmens' cottage or anywhere else except on the road to the station at the moment when the fatal blow was dealt. Your Honor, this is our answer to the terrible charge which has been made against the prisoner. It is simple, but it is effective, and upon it, as upon a rock, we found our defence. And with a bow, Mr. Orcutt sat down, and it being late in the day, the court adjourned. End of chapter 29. Of Hand and Ring by Anna Katharine Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 30. Byrd uses his pencil again. Ay, sir, you shall find me reasonable. If it be so, I shall do that is reason. Merry Wives of Windsor. Byrd, you look dazed. I am. Hickory paused till they were well clear of the crowd that was pouring from the courtroom. Then he said, "Well, what do you think of this as a defense?" "I am beginning to think it is good," was the slow, almost hesitating reply. "Beginning to think?" "Yes. At first it seemed puerile. I had such a steadfast belief in Mansell's guilt I could not give much credit to any argument tending to shake me loose from my convictions. But the longer I think of it, the more vividly I remember the difficulties of the road he had to take in his flight. I have travelled it myself, you remember, and I don't see how he could have got over the ground in 90 minutes. Hickory's face assumed a somewhat quizzical expression. "Byrd," said he, "whom were you looking at during the time Mr. Orcutt was making his speech?" "At the speaker, of course." "Bah!" "Whom were you looking at?" "At the person who would be likely to give me some return for my pains." "The prisoner?" "No." "Whom, then?" "Miss Dare." Byrd shifted uneasily to the other side of his companion. "And what did you discover from her, Hickory?" he asked. "Two things. First, that she knew no more than the rest of us what the defence was going to be. Secondly, that she regarded it as a piece of great cleverness on the part of Orcutt, but that she didn't believe in it any more any more than I do." "Hickory." "Yes, sir. Miss Dare is a smart woman and a resolute one, and could have baffled the penetration of all concerned if she had only remembered to try. But she forgot that others might be more interested in making out what was going on in her mind at this critical moment than in watching the speaker or noting the effect of his words upon the court. In fact, she was too eager to hear what he had to say to remember her role, I fancy." "But I don't see," began Byrd. "Wait," interrupted the other. "You believe Miss Dare loves Craik Mansell?" "Most certainly," was the gloomy response. "Very well, then. If she had known what the defence was going to be, she would have been acutely alive to the effect it was going to have upon the jury. That would have been her first thought and her only thought all the time Mr. Orcutt was speaking, and she would have sat with her eyes fixed upon the men upon whose acceptance or non acceptance of the truth of this argument her lover's life ultimately depended. But no, her gaze, like yours, remained fixed upon Mr. Orcutt, and she scarcely breathed or stirred till he had fully revealed what his argument was going to be. Then—" "Well, then?" "Instead of flashing with the joy of relief which any devoted woman would experience, who sees in this argument a proof of her lover's innocence, she merely dropped her eyes and resumed her old mask of impassiveness." "From all of which you gather—" "That her feelings were not those of relief, but doubt. In other words, that the knowledge she possesses is of a character which laughs to scorn any subterfuge of defence as Orcutt advances." "Hickory," ventured Byrd, after a long silence, "it is time we understood each other. What is your secret thought in relation to Miss Dare?" "My secret thought? Well," drawled the other, looking away, "I think she knows more about this crime than she has yet chosen to reveal." "More than she evinced to day in her testimony?" "Yes." "I should like to know why you think so. What special reason have you for drawing any such conclusions?" "Well, one reason is that she was no more shaken by the plausible argument advanced by Mr. Orcutt. If her knowledge of the crime was limited to what she acknowledged in her testimony, and her conclusions as to Mansell's guilt were really founded upon such facts as she gave us in court to day, why didn't she grasp at the possibility of her lover's innocence which was held out to her by his counsel? No, facts that she had testified to, not even the fact of his ring having been found on the scene of the murder, could stand before the proof that he left the region of Mrs. Clemmens' house before the moment of assault. Yet, while evincing interest in the argument, and some confidence in it too, as one that would be likely to satisfy the jury, she gave no tokens of being surprised by it into a reconsideration of her own conclusions, as must have happened if she told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth when she was on the stand to day. "I see," remarked Byrd. "Then you are presuming to understand Miss Dare, after all." Hickory smiled. "You call this woman a mystery," proceeded Byrd. "Hint at great possibilities of acting on her part, and yet in a moment, as it were, profess yourself the reader of her inmost thoughts, and the interpreter of looks and expressions she has manifestly assumed to hide those thoughts." Hickory's smile broadened into a laugh. "Just so," he cried. "One's imbecility has to stop somewhere." Then, as he saw Byrd look grave at it, "I haven't a single fact at my command that isn't shared by you. My conclusions are different, that is all." Horace Byrd did not answer. Perhaps if Hickory could have sounded his thoughts, he would have discovered that their conclusions were not so far apart as he imagined. "Hickory," Byrd at last demanded, "what do you propose to do with your conclusions?" "I propose to wait and see if Mr. Orcutt proves his case. If he don't, I have nothing more to say; but if he does, I think I shall call the attention of Mr. Ferris to one question he has omitted to ask Miss Dare." "And what is that?" "Where she was on the morning of Mrs. Clemmens' murder. You remember you took some interest in that question yourself a while ago." "But—" "Not that I think anything will come of it, only my conscience will be set at rest." "Hickory," Byrd's face had quite altered now, "where do you think Miss Dare was at that time?" "Where do I think she was?" repeated Hickory. "Well, I will tell you. I think she was not in Professor Darling's observatory." "Do you think she was in the glade back of Widow Clemmens' house?" "Now you ask me conundrums." "Hickory," Byrd spoke almost violently, "Mr. Orcutt shall not prove his case." "No." "I will make the run over the ground supposed to have been taken by Mansell in his flight, and show in my own proper person that it can be done in the time specified." Hickory's eye, which had taken a rapid survey of his companion's form during the utterance of the above, darkened. Then he slowly shook his head. "You couldn't," he rejoined laconically. "Too little staying power. You'd give out before you got clear of the woods. Better delegate the job to me." "To you?" "Yes, I'm of the make to stand long runs. Besides, I am no novice at athletic sports of any kind. More than one race has owned its interest to the efforts of your humble servant. 'Tis my pet amusement, you see, as offhand drawing is yours, and it is likely to be of as much use to me, eh?" "Hickory, you are chaffing me." "Think so? Do you see that 5-barred gate over there? Well, now, keep your eye on the top rail and see if I clear it without a graze or not." "Stop!" exclaimed Byrd. "Don't make a fool of yourself in the public street. I'll believe you if you say you understand such things." "Well, I do, and what is more, I am adept at them. If I can't make that run in the time requisite to show that Mansell could have committed the murder, and yet arrive at the station the moment he did, I don't know of a chap who can." "Hickory, do you mean to say you will make this run?" "Yes." "With a conscientious effort to prove that Orcutt's scheme of defence is false?" "Yes." "When?" "To morrow." "While we are in court?" "Yes." Byrd turned square around, gave Hickory a look, and offered his hand. "You are a good fellow," he declared. "May luck go with you." Hickory suddenly became unusually thoughtful. A little while ago, he reflected, this fellow's sympathies were all with Mansell. Now he would risk my limbs and neck to have the man proved guilty. He does not wish Miss Dare to be questioned again, I see." "Hickory," resumed Byrd a few minutes later, "Orcutt has not rested the defence upon this one point without being very sure of its being unassailable." "I know that." "He has had more than one expert make that run during the weeks that have elapsed since the murder. It has been tested to the utmost." "I know that." "If you succeed, then, in doing what none of these others have, it must be by dint of a better understanding of the route you have to take and the difficulties you will have to overcome. Now, do you understand the route?" "I think so." "You will have to start from the widow's door, you know." "Certain." "Cross the bog, enter the woods, skirt the hut, but I won't go into details. The best way to prove you know exactly what you have to do is to see if you can describe the route yourself. Come into my room, old fellow, and let us see if you can give me a sufficiently exact account of the ground you will have to pass over, for me to draw up a chart by it. An hour spent with pencil and paper to night may save you from an uncertainty to morrow that would lose you a good 10 minutes." "Good! That's an idea. Let's try it," rejoined Hickory. And being by this time at the hotel, they went in. In another moment they were shut up in Mr. Byrd's room, with a large sheet of foolscap before them. "Now," cried Horace, taking up a pencil, "begin with your description, and I will follow with my drawing." "Very well," replied Hickory, setting himself forward in a way to watch his colleague's pencil. "I leave the widow's house by the dining room door. A square for the house, Byrd, well down in the left-hand corner of the paper, and a dotted line for the path I take. Run down the yard to the fence, leap it, cross the bog, and make straight for the woods." "Very good," commented Byrd, sketching rapidly as the other spoke. "Having taken care to enter where the trees are thinnest, I find a path along which I rush in a bee line till I come to the glade. An ellipse for the glade, Byrd, with a dot in it for the hut, merely stopping to dash into the hut and out again." "Wait," Byrd put in, pausing with his pencil in mid air. "What did you want to go into the hut for?" "To get the bag which I propose to leave there to night." "Bag?" "Yes. Mansell carried a bag, didn't he? Don't you remember what the station master said about the curious portmanteau the fellow had in his hand when he came to the station?" "Yes, but—" "Byrd, if I run that fellow to his death, it must be fairly. A man with an awkward bag in his hand cannot run like a man without one. So I handicap myself in the same way he did. Do you see?" "Yes." "Very well, then. I rush into the hut, pick up the bag, carry it out, and dash immediately into the woods at the opening behind the hut. What are you doing?" "Just putting in a few landmarks," explained Byrd, who had run his pencil off in an opposite direction. "See, that is the path to West Side which I followed in my first expedition through the woods. The path, too, which Miss Dare took when she came to the hut at the time of the fearful thunderstorm. And wait, let me put in Professor Darling's house, too, and the ridge from which you can see Mrs. Clemmens' cottage. It will help us to understand." "What?" cried Hickory, with quick suspiciousness, as the other paused. But Byrd, impatiently shaking his head, answered. The whole situation, of course." Then, pointing hastily back to the hut, exclaimed, "So you have entered the woods again at this place. Very well. What then?" "Well, then," resumed Hickory, "I make my way along the path I find there, run it at right angles to the one leading up to the glade, till I come to a stony ledge covered with blackberry bushes. A very cleverly drawn blackberry patch that, Bird. Here I fear I shall have to pause." "Why?" "Because, deuce take me if I can remember where the path runs after that." "But I can. A big hemlock tree stands just at the point where the woods open again. Make for that, and you will be all right." "Good enough, but it's mighty rough traveling over that ledge, and I shall have to go at a foot's pace. The stones are slippery as glass, and a fall would scarcely be conducive to the final success of my scheme." "I will make the path serpentine." "That will be highly expressive." "And now, what next?" "The forester's road, Bird, upon which I ought to come about this time. Run it due east and west. Not that I have surveyed the ground, but it looks more natural so, and let the dotted lines traverse it toward the right, for that is the direction in which I shall go." "It's done," said Bird. "Well, description fails me now. All I know is I come out on a hillside running straight down to the river bank, and that the highway is visible beyond, leading directly to the station. But the way to get to it—" "I will show you," interposed Bird, mapping out the station and their intervening river, with a few quick strokes of his dexterous pencil. "You see this point where you issue from the woods? Very good. It is, as you say, on a hillside overlooking the river. Well, it seems unfortunate, but there is no way of crossing that river at this point. The falls above and below make it no place for boats, so you will have to go back along its banks for some little distance before you come to a bridge. But there is no use in hesitating or looking about for a shorter path. The woods just here are encumbered with a mass of tangled undergrowth, which makes them simply impassable, except as you keep in the road, while the river curves so frequently and with so much abruptness. See, I will endeavor to give you some notion of it here, that you would only waste time in attempting to make any short cuts. But once over the bridge—" "I have only to foot it," burst in Hickory, taking up the sketch, which the other had now completed, and glancing at it with a dubious eye. "Do you know, Bird," he remarked in another moment, "that it strikes me Mansell did not take this roundabout road to the station." "Why?" "Because it is so roundabout, and he is such a clear-headed fellow. Couldn't he have got there by some short cut?" "No. Don't you remember how Orcutt cross-examined the station master about the appearance which Mansell presented when he came upon the platform, and how that person was forced to acknowledge that, although the prisoner looked heated and exhausted, his clothes were neither muddied nor torn? Now, I did not think of it at the time, but this was done by Orcutt to prove that Mansell did take the road. I have jotted down here, since any other would have carried him through swamps knee-deep with mud, or among stones and briars which would have put him in a state of disorder totally unfitting him for travel." "That is so," acquiesced Hickory, after a moment's thought. "Mansell must be kept in the path. Well, well, we will see to morrow if wit and swift foot can make anything out of this problem." "Wit? Hickory, it will be wit, and not a swift foot, or luck maybe I should call it, or rather Providence. If a wagon should be going along the highway now—" "Let me alone for availing myself of it," laughed Hickory. "Wagon! I would jump on the back of a mule sooner than lose the chance of gaining a minute on these experts whose testimony we are to hear to morrow." "Don't lose confidence in old Hickory yet. He's the boy for this job, if he isn't for any other." And so the matter was settled. End of chapter 30. Section 33 of Hand and Ring by Katharine Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 31. The Chief Witness for the Defense. Your if is the only peacemaker. Much virtue in if. As you like it. The crowd that congregated at the courthouse the next morning was even greater than at any previous time. The opening speech of Mr. Orcutt had been telegraphed all over the country, and many who had not been especially interested in the case before felt an anxiety to hear how he would substantiate the defense he had so boldly and confidently put forth. To the general eye, however, the appearance of the courtroom was much the same as on the previous day. Only to the close observer was it evident that the countenances of the several actors in this exciting drama wore a different expression. Mr. Byrd, who by dint of the most energetic effort had succeeded in procuring his old seat, was one of these, and as he noted the significant change, wished that Hickory had been on his side to note it with him. The first person he observed was, naturally, the judge. Judge Evans, who has been barely introduced to the reader, was a man of great moral force and discretion. He had occupied his present position for many years, and possessed not only the confidence but the affections of those who came within the sphere of his jurisdiction. The reason for this undoubtedly lay in his sympathetic nature. While never accused of weakness, he so unmistakably retained the feeling heart under the official ermine that it was by no means an uncommon thing for him to show more emotion in uttering a sentence than the man he condemned did in listening to it. His expression, then, upon this momentous morning was of great significance to Mr. Byrd. In its hopefulness and cheer was written the extent of the effect made upon the unprejudiced mind by the promised defense. As for Mr. Orcutt himself, no advocate could display a more confident air or prepare to introduce his witnesses with more dignity or quiet assurance. His self-possession was so marked, indeed, that Mr. Byrd, who felt a sympathetic interest in what he knew to be seething in this man's breast, was greatly surprised, and surveyed, with a feeling almost akin to awe, the lawyer who could sink all personal considerations in the cause he was trying. Miss Dare, on the contrary, was in a state of nervous agitation. Though no movement betrayed this, the very force of the restraint she put upon herself showed the extent of her inner excitement. The prisoner alone remained unchanged. Nothing could shake his steady soul from its composure, not the possibility of death or the prospect of release. He was absolutely imposing in his quiet presence, and Mr. Byrd could not but admire the power of the man, even while recoiling from his supposed guilt. The opening of the defense carried the minds of many back to the inquest. The nice question of time was gone into, and the moment when Mrs. Clemmens was found lying bleeding and insensible at the foot of her dining-room clock, fixed at 3 or 4 minutes past noon. The next point to be ascertained was when she received the deadly blow. And here the great surprise of the defense occurred. Mr. Orcutt rose, and in clear, firm tones said, "Gouverneur Hildreth, take the stand." Instantly, and before the witness could comply, Mr. Ferris was on his feet. "Who? What?" he cried. "Gouverneur Hildreth," repeated Mr. Orcutt. "Did you know this gentleman has already been in custody upon suspicion of having committed the crime for which the prisoner is now being tried?" "I do," returned Mr. Orcutt, with imperturbable sang-froid. And is it your intention to save your client from the gallows by putting the halter around the neck of the man you now propose to call as a witness?" "No," retorted Mr. Orcutt. "I do not propose to put the halter about any man's neck. That is the proud privilege of my learned and respected opponent." With an impatient frown, Mr. Ferris sat down, while Mr. Hildreth, who had taken advantage of this short passage of arms between the lawyers to retain his place in the remote corner where he was more or less shielded from the curiosity of the crowd, rose, and with a slow and painful movement that at once attracted attention to his carefully bandaged throat and the general air of debility which surrounded him, came hesitatingly forward and took his stand in face of the judge and jury. Necessarily, a low murmur greeted him from the throng of interested spectators who saw in this appearance before them of the man who, by no more than a hair's breadth, had escaped occupying the position of the prisoner, another of those dramatic incidents with which this trial seemed fairly to bristle. It was hushed by one look from the judge, but not before it had awakened in Mr. Hildreth's weak and sensitive nature those old emotions of shame and rage whose token was a flush so deep and profuse it unconsciously repelled the gaze of all who beheld it. Immediately Mr. Byrd, who sat with bated breath, as it were, so intense was his excitement over the unexpected turn of affairs, recognized the full meaning of the situation, and awarded to Mr. Orcutt all the admiration which his skill in bringing it about undoubtedly deserved. Indeed, as the detective's quick glance flashed first at the witness, cringing in his old unfortunate way before the gaze of the crowd, and then at the prisoner sitting unmoved and quietly disdainful in his dignity and pride, he felt that, whether Mr. Orcutt succeeded in getting all he wished from his witness, the mere conjunction of these two men before the jury, with the opportunity for comparison between them which it inevitably offered, was the master stroke of this eminent lawyer's legal career. Mr. Ferris seemed to feel the significance of the moment also, for his eyes fell and his brow contracted with a sudden doubt that convinced Mr. Byrd that, mentally, he was on the point of giving up his case. The witness was at once sworn. "Orcutt believes Hildreth to be the murderer, or at least is willing that others should be impressed with this belief," was the comment of Byrd to himself at this juncture. He had surprised the look which had passed between the lawyer and Miss Dare, a look of such piercing sarcasm and scornful inquiry that it might well arrest the detective's attention and lead him to question the intentions of the man who could allow such an expression of his feelings to escape him. But whether the detective was correct in his inference, or whether Mr. Orcutt's glance at Imogene meant no more than the natural emotion of a man who suddenly sees revealed to the woman he loves the face of him for whose welfare she has expressed the greatest concern, and for whose sake, while unknown, she has consented to make the heaviest of sacrifices, the wary lawyer was careful to show neither scorn nor prejudice when he turned toward the witness and began his interrogations. On the contrary, his manner was highly respectful, if not considerate, and his questions, while put with such art as to keep the jury constantly alert to the anomalous position which the witness undoubtedly held, were of a nature mainly to call forth the one fact for which his testimony was presumably desired. This was his presence in the widow's house on the morning of the murder, and the fact that he saw her and conversed with her, and could swear to her being alive and unhurt up to a few minutes before noon. To be sure, the precise minute of his leaving her in this condition Mr. Orcutt failed to gather from the witness, but, like the coroner at the inquest, he succeeded in eliciting enough to show that the visit had been completed prior to the appearance of the tramp at the widow's kitchen door, as it had begun after the disappearance of the Danton children from the front of the widow's house. This fact being established and impressed upon the jury, Mr. Orcutt, with admirable judgment, cut short his own examination of the witness, and passed him over to the district attorney with a grim smile, suggestive of his late taunt that to this gentleman belonged the special privilege of weaving halters for the necks of unhappy criminals. Mr. Ferris, who understood his adversary's tactics only too well, but who in his anxiety for the truth could not afford to let such an opportunity for reaching it slip by, opened his cross-examination with great vigor. The result could not but be favorable to the defense and damaging to the prosecution. The position which Mr. Hildreth must occupy if the prisoner was acquitted was patent to all understandings, making each and every admission on his part tending to exculpate the latter of a manifest force and significance. Mr. Ferris, however, was careful not to exceed his duty or press his inquiries beyond due bounds. The man they were trying was not Gouverneur Hildreth, but Craik Mansell, and to press the witness too close was to urge him into admissions seemingly so damaging to himself as, in the present state of affairs, to incur the risk of distracting attention entirely from the prisoner. Mr. Hildreth's examination being at an end, Mr. Orcutt proceeded with his case by furnishing proof calculated to fix the moment at which Mr. Hildreth had made his call. This was done in much the same way as it was at the inquest. Mrs. Clemmens' next-door neighbor, Mrs. Danton, was summoned to the stand, and after her 2 children, the testimony of the 3 taking with Mr. Hildreth's own acknowledgments, making it very evident to all who listened that he could not have gone into Mrs. Clemmens' house before 11:45. The natural inference followed. Allowing the least possible time for his interview with Mrs. Clemmens, the moment at which the witness swore to having seen her alive and unhurt must have been as late as 10 minutes before noon. Taking pains to impress this time upon the jury, Mr. Orcutt next proceeded to fix the moment at which the prisoner arrived at Monteith Quarry Station. As the fact of his having arrived in time to take the afternoon train to Buffalo had already been proved by the prosecution, it was manifestly necessary only to determine at what hour the train was due and whether it had come in on time. The hour was ascertained by direct consultation with the road's timetable to be just 20 minutes past 1, and the station master, having been called to the stand, gave it as his best knowledge and belief that the train had been on time. This, however, not being deemed explicit enough for the purposes of the defense, there was submitted to the jury a telegram bearing the date of that same day and distinctly stating that the train was on time. This was testified to by the conductor of the train as having been sent by him to the superintendent of the road, who was awaiting the cars at Monteith, and was received as evidence and considered as conclusively fixing the hour at which the prisoner arrived at the Quarry Station as 20 minutes past 1. This settled, witnesses were called to testify as to the nature of the path by which he must have traveled from the widow's house to the station. A chart, similar to that Mr. Byrd had drawn, but more explicit and nice in its details, was submitted to the jury by an actual surveyor of the ground, after which, and the establishment of other minor details not necessary to enumerate here, a man of well-known proficiency in running and other athletic sports was summoned to the stand. Mr. Byrd, who up to this moment had shared in the interest everywhere displayed in the defense, now felt his attention wandering. The fact is He had heard the whistle of the train on which Hickory had promised to return to Sibley, and interesting as was the testimony given by the witness, he could not prevent his eyes from continually turning toward the door by which he expected Hickory to enter. Strange to say, Mr. Orcutt seemed to take a like interest in that same door, and was more than once detected by Byrd flashing a hurried glance in its direction, as if he too were on the lookout for some one. Meantime, the expert in running was saying, "It took me 120 minutes to go over the ground the first time, and 115 minutes the next. I gained 5 minutes the second time, you see," he explained, "by knowing my ground better and by saving my strength where it was of no avail to attempt great speed. The last time I made the effort, however, I lost 3 minutes on my former time. The wood road which I had to take for some distance was deep with mud, and my feet sank with every step. The shortest time, then, which I was able to make in the 3 attempts was 115 minutes. Now, as the time between the striking of the fatal blow and the hour at which the prisoner arrived at the quarry station was only 90 minutes, a general murmur of satisfaction followed this announcement. It was only momentary, however, for Mr. Ferris, rising to cross-examine the witness, curiosity prevailed over all lesser emotions, and an immediate silence followed without the intervention of the court. "Did you make these 3 runs from Mrs. Clemmens' house to Monteith Quarry Station entirely on foot?" "I did, sir." "Was that necessary?" "Yes, sir. As far as the highway, at least. The path through the woods is not wide enough for a horse, unless it be for that short distance where the Forester's road intervenes." "And you ran there?" "Yes, sir, twice at full speed. The third time I had the experience I have told you of." "And how long do you think it took you to go over that especial portion of the ground?" "5 minutes, maybe." "And supposing you had had a horse?" "Well, sir, if I had had a horse, and if he had been waiting there, all ready for me to jump on his back, and if he had been a good runner and used to the road, I think I could have gone over it in 2 minutes, if I had not first broken my neck on some of the jagged stones that roughened the road." "In other words, you could have saved 3 minutes if you had been furnished with a horse at that particular spot?" "Yes, if—" Mr. Orcutt, whose eyes had been fixed upon the door at this particular juncture, now looked back at the witness and hurriedly rose to his feet. "Has my esteemed friend any testimony on hand to prove that the prisoner had a horse at this place? If he has not, I object to these questions." "What testimony I have to produce will come in at its proper time," retorted Mr. Ferris. "Meanwhile, I think I have a right to put this or any other kind of similar question to the witness." The judge acquiescing with a nod, Mr. Orcutt sat down. Mr. Ferris went on. "Did you meet any one on the road during any of these 3 runs which you made?" "No, sir. That is, I met no one in the woods. There were 1 or 2 persons on the highway the last time I ran over it." "Were they riding or walking?" "Walking." Here Mr. Orcutt interposed. "Did you say that in passing over the highway you ran?" "Yes, sir." "Why did you do this? Had you not been told that the prisoner was seen to be walking when he came down the road to the station?" "Yes, sir, but I was in for time, you see." "And you did not make it, even with that advantage?" "No, sir." The second expert had the same story to tell, with a few variations. He had made one of his runs in 5 minutes less than the other had done, but it was by great exertion that left him completely exhausted when he arrived at the station. It was during his cross-examination that Hickory at last came in. Horace Byrd, who had been growing very impatient during the last few minutes, happened to be looking at the door when it opened to admit this latecomer. So was Mr. Orcutt, but Byrd did not notice this, or Hickory either. If they had, perhaps Hickory would have been more careful to hide his feelings. As it was, he no sooner met his colleague's eye than he gave a quick, despondent shake of the head in the intimation that he had failed. Mr. Byrd, who had anticipated a different result, was greatly disappointed. His countenance fell, and he cast a glance of compassion at Miss Dare, now flushing with a secret but slowly growing hope. The defence, then, was good, and she ran the risk of being interrogated again. It was a prospect from which Mr. Byrd recoiled. As soon as Hickory got the chance, he made his way to the side of Byrd. "No go," was his low but expressive salutation. 105 minutes is the shortest time in which I can get over the ground, and that by a deuced hard scramble of it, too. "But that's 5 minutes' gain on the experts," Byrd whispered. "Is it? Hope I could gain something on them. But what's 5 minutes' gain in an affair like this? 15 is what's wanted." "I know it, and 15 I could not make, nor 10 either, unless a pair of wings should be given me to carry me over the river." "Sure?" "Sure." Here there was some commotion in their vicinity, owing to the withdrawal of the last witness from the stand. Hickory took advantage of the bustle to lean over and whisper in Byrd's ear. "Do you know, I think I have been watched to-day. There was a fellow concealed in Mrs. Clemmens' house who saw me leave it, and who, I have no doubt, took express note of the time I started. And there was another chap hanging round the station at the quarries, whom I am almost sure had no business there, unless it was to see at what moment I arrived. He came back to Sibley when I did, but he telegraphed first, and it is my opinion that Orcutt—" Here he was greatly startled by hearing his name spoken in a loud and commanding tone of voice. Stopping short, he glanced up, encountering the eye of Mr. Orcutt fixed upon him from the other side of the courtroom, and realized he was being summoned to the witness stand. "The deuce!" he murmured with a look at Byrd, to which none but an artist could do justice. End of chapter 31. Section 34 of Hand and Ring by Anna Katharine Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 32. Hickory. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck 1, and down he run. Hickory dickory dock. Mother Goose Melodies. Hickory's face was no new one to the court. He had occupied a considerable portion of one day in giving testimony for the prosecution, and his rough manner and hearty face, twinkling, however, at times, with an irrepressible humor that redeemed it and him from all charge of ugliness, were well known not only to the jury but to all the habitués of the trial. Yet when he stepped upon the stand at the summons of Mr. Orcutt, every eye turned toward him with curiosity, so great was the surprise with which his name had been hailed, and so vivid the interest aroused in what a detective devoted to the cause of the prosecution might have to say in the way of supporting the defence. The first question uttered by Mr. Orcutt served to put them upon the right track. "Will you tell the court where you have been to-day, Mr. Hickory?" "Well," replied the witness, in a slow and ruminating tone of voice, as he cast a look at Mr. Ferris, half apologetic and half reassuring, "I have been in a good many places." "You know what I mean," interrupted Mr. Orcutt. "Tell the court where you were between the hours of 11 and 1:15, he added, with a quick glance at the paper he held in his hand. "Oh, then," cried Hickory, suddenly relaxing into his drollest self, Well, then, I was all along the route from Sibley to Monteith Quarry Station. I don't think I was stationary at any 1 minute of the time, sir." "In other words," suggested Mr. Orcutt, severely. "I was trying to show myself smarter than my betters, bowing with a great show of respect to the two experts who sat near. Or, in other words still, I was trying to make the distance between Mrs. Clemmens' house and the station I have mentioned in time sufficient to upset the defence, sir." And the look he cast at Mr. Ferris was wholly apologetic now. "Ah, I understand. And at whose suggestion did you undertake to do this, Mr. Hickory?" "At the suggestion of a friend of mine, who is also somewhat of a detective." "And when was the suggestion given?" "After your speech, sir, yesterday afternoon." "And where?" "At the hotel, sir, where I and my friend put up." "Did not the counsel for the prosecution order you to make this attempt?" "No, sir." "Did he not know you were going to make it?" "No, sir." "Who did know it?" "My friend." "No one else?" "Well, sir, judging from my present position, I should say there seems to have been some one else," the witness slyly retorted. The calmness with which Mr. Orcutt carried on this examination suffered a momentary disturbance. "You know what I mean," he returned. "Did you tell any one but your friend that you were going to undertake this run?" "No, sir." "Mr. Hickory," the lawyer now pursued, "will you tell us why you considered yourself qualified to succeed in an attempt where you had already been told regular experts had failed?" "Well, sir, I don't know unless you find the solution in the slightly presumptive character of my disposition." "Have you ever run before, or engaged in athletic sports of any kind?" "Oh, yes, I have run before." "And engaged in athletic sports?" "Yes, sir." "Mr. Hickory, have you ever run in a race with men of well known reputation for speed?" "Well, yes, I have." "Did you ever win in running such a race?" "Once." "No more?" "Well, then, twice." The dejection with which this last assent came forth roused the mirth of some light hearted, feather headed people, but the officers of the court soon put a stop to that. "Mr. Hickory, will you tell us whether on account of having twice beaten in a race requiring the qualifications of a professional runner, you consider yourself qualified to judge of the feasibility of any other man's making the distance from Mrs. Clemmens' house to Monteith Quarry Station in 90 minutes by your own ability or non ability to do so?" "Yes, sir, I did. But a man's judgment of his own qualifications don't go very far, I've been told." "I did not ask you for any remarks, Mr. Hickory. This is a serious matter and demands serious treatment. I asked if in undertaking to make this run in 90 minutes you did not presume to judge the feasibility of the prisoner having made it in that time, and you answered yes. It was enough." The witness bowed with an air of great innocence. "Now," resumed the lawyer, "you say you made this run from Mrs. Clemmens' house to Monteith Quarry Station to day. Before telling us in what time you did it, will you be kind enough to say what route you took?" "The one, sir, which has been pointed out by the prosecution as that which the prisoner undoubtedly took. The path through the woods and over the bridge to the highway. I knew no other." "Did you know this?" "Yes, sir." "How came you to know it?" "I had been over it before." "The whole distance?" "Yes, sir." "Mr. Hickory, were you well enough acquainted with the route not to be obliged to stop at any point during your journey to see if you were in the right path or taking the most direct route to your destination?" "Yes, sir." "And when you got to the river?" "I turned straight to the right and made for the bridge." "Did you not pause long enough to see if you could not cross the stream in some way?" "No, sir. I don't know how to swim in my clothes and keep them dry. As for my wings, I had unfortunately left them at home." Mr. Orcutt frowned. "These attempts at humor," said he, "are very malapropos, Mr. Hickory." Then, with a return to his usual tone, "Did you cross the bridge at a run?" "Yes, sir." "And did you keep up your pace when you got to the high road?" "No, I did not." "You did not?" "No, sir." "And why, may I ask?" "I was tired." "Tired?" "Yes, sir." There was a droll demureness in the way Hickory said this which made Mr. Orcutt pause, but in another minute he went on. "And what pace do you take when you are tired?" "A horse's pace when I can get it," was the laughing reply. "A team was going by, sir, and I just jumped up with the driver." "Ah, you rode, then, part of the way. Was it a fast team, Mr. Hickory?" "Well, it wasn't one of Bonner's." "Did they go faster than a man could run?" "Yes, sir, I'm obliged to say they did." "And how long did you ride behind them?" "Till I got in sight of the station." "Why did you not go farther?" "Because I had been told the prisoner was seen to walk up to the station, and I meant to be fair to him when I knew how." "Oh, you did. And do you think it was fair to him to steal a ride on the highway?" "Yes, sir." "And why?" "Because no one has ever told me that he didn't ride down the highway, at least till he came within sight of the station." "Mr. Hickory," inquired the lawyer severely, "are you in possession of any knowledge proving that he did?" "No, sir." Mr. Byrd, who had been watching the prisoner breathlessly through all this, saw, or thought he saw, the faintest shadow of an odd, disdainful smile cross his sternly composed features at this moment, but he could not be sure. There was enough in the possibility, however, to make the detective thoughtful. But Mr. Orcutt, proceeding rapidly with his examination, left him no time to formulate his sensations into words. "So that by taking this wagon you are certain you lost no time?" "Yes, sir." "Rather gained some?" "Yes, sir." "Mr. Hickory, will you now state whether you put forth your full speed to day in going from Mrs. Clemmens' house to the Quarry Station?" "I did not." "What?" "I did not put forth anything like my full speed, sir," the witness repeated, with a twinkle in the direction of Byrd that fell just short of being a decided wink. "And why, may I ask? What restrained you from running as fast as you could? Sympathy for the defence?" The ironical suggestion conveyed in this last question gave Hickory an excuse for indulging in his peculiar humor. "No, sir. Sympathy for the prosecution. I feared the loss of one of its most humble but valuable assistants. In other words, I was afraid I should break my neck." "And why should you have any special fear of breaking your neck?" "The path is so uneven, sir. No man could run for much of the way without endangering his life or at least his limbs." "Did you run when you could?" "Yes, sir." "And in those places where you could not run, did you proceed as fast as you knew how?" "Yes, sir." "Very well. Now I think it is time you told the jury just how many minutes it took you to go from Mrs. Clemmens' door to the Monteith Quarry Station." "Well, sir, according to my watch, it took 105 minutes." Mr. Orcutt glanced impressively at the jury. 105 minutes," he repeated. He then turned to the witness with his concluding questions. "Mr. Hickory, were you present in the courtroom just now when the two experts whom I have employed to make the run gave their testimony?" "No, sir." "Do you know in what time they made it?" "I believe I do." "I was told by the person whom I informed of my failure that I had gained 5 minutes upon them." "And what did you reply?" "That I hoped I could make something on them, but that 5 minutes wasn't much when a clean 15 was wanted," returned Hickory, with another droll look at the experts and an askance appeal at Byrd, which being translated might read, "How in the deuce could this man have known
what I was whispering to you on the other side of the courtroom. Is he a wizard, this Orcutt?" He forgot that a successful lawyer is always more or less of a wizard. CHAPTER 32